Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the first episode of the story where Madara devised a plan. The Yondaime ruined things. Madara devised another plan. One that could never fail. But even the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and this one had just run into Konoha's most surprising ninja, Uzumaki Naruto. This story is from Arun 2110. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. In the evening light, General Hino of Fire looked at the troops arrayed neatly before him. As commander of Southern Theater, he was charged with the conquest of Tea. Turning to Brigadier Sarutobi, he raised an eyebrow in askance. Terajiro's moving his forces to the side to let ours pass as we speak, the recently retired Hokage replied, and my squads are in place. I should join my troops for the assault. You're joining them? Hino asked. Sarutobi nodded. I need to show them there's plenty of fight still left in these old bones. Only way to cement the loyalty of fighting men like these quickly. General Hino nodded and turned to the other general by his side. And what of you, Toyota? My officers are going to be leading from the front. Unlike Hiruzen, I understand and accept I'm too old for rapid assaults and desperate fights. I'll stay back here, organize units and expedite movement. We're racing against time, and the faster we get more men across before Shinichi reacts, the better the chances we'll succeed. Hino thought about it for a moment and nodded approval. Very well, gentlemen. I'll leave you to your jobs. 1st and 2nd regiments should have started the attack along the center of the enemy line 10 minutes back. Good luck and good hunting. The capital was restive. Gossip of the imminent war was pervasive and most of the hearsay was negative. There was a palpable atmosphere of fear, and as the route operatives eavesdropped on the various patrons at bars across the city, they knew the situation wasn't yet ripe for an event, but was slowly getting there. Until then, they would wait patiently. Today, as it had before, and as it will forever, Root would ensure that the great tree would emerge triumphant both on the field and off against its adversaries in the end. Vice Admiral Muramaki looked dispassionately at the smoking ruins of hundreds of buildings on the northern end of the city and the crippled hulls of his fleet. The fools in the capital had yet to realize it, but the war was already as good as lost without the navy to run interference against fire. But, he could not help but think that Konoha had made a monumental error in judgment. The pattern of assault on the ships in the harbor told him one tale, but it was at odds with the burnt-out shells on the outer limits. It was confusing to divine the enemy's motives, but if he ignored the arson in the city as an aberration, a clear picture emerged. And nothing else made sense. Listen, kids, the ANBU explained patiently, Jiraiya's got enough on his hands without having to worry about you brats. Sasuke opened his mouth, but stayed whatever he was about to say at the glare the operator shot him. I'm not in the mood for arguments, the man added with a glare in the raven-haired Genin's direction. I gave you an order and expect you to obey them, rookie ANBU though you are. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Team 7 replied in crescendo. The ANBU nodded and took a seat next to them. That's good. Pause. So you're Kakashizen's brats, huh? He asked. Team 7 nodded. Yes, we are. Well, you don't look like much, but Kakashizen wasn't a looker himself, the man said. You've served with Sensei? Naruto asked, curiously. The ANBU nodded. With him, and under him. Really? Got the scars and the tattoos to prove it, brat, the man countered. Then, softening his tone, I'm Tripod, don't ask how I got that name, and if you value your life, you won't laugh. Honored to meet you, Tripod-san. I'm Haruno Sakura, and these are my teammates, Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto. This must be my lucky day, Tripod said with a grin. I got to meet the fabled Team 7 face to face. Ha! Ha! Naruto laughed sarcastically. I'm exaggerating, of course, the ANBU added with an even wider grin. What was Sensei like back in those days? Sakura asked. I heard he was an asshole back before he became Jounin. They say he changed. Me? I didn't know him back then. What I do know is that he is the best damn tactician and the best commander I'd worked with during my 15 years of service in ANBU. Why, there was that one time. Tripod trailed off. Tell us, Naruto urged, seeing that the man wasn't going to explain. Tripod shrugged. I can't. You guys aren't cleared for that compartment. Anyways, he was an intense kind of man. And he's loyal like you wouldn't believe. Would charge the gates of hell to save a subordinate and was always worried about his men and the mission. There are some commanders who'll expend nin like so many Ryo, but Kakashizen wasn't like that. You had to complete the mission, of course, but you always knew that if you died, it wasn't because your CO decided you were expendable. ANBUR, mind you, he said, shooting them a pointed look, but Kakashizen was a craftsman and he didn't like wasting bodies. It's not efficient, you see. And then he quit ANBU. I'd heard over the years he'd mellowed out quite a bit. Kakashi sensei, mellow? Naruto said aloud, wonderingly. These days, at least, he is, Sasuke countered. The first few months of our training were intense, Sakura explained for Tripod's benefit. The ANBU nodded. I know. Hell, everyone in Fire's Ninja Corps knows by now, probably. You guys are famous. Really? Naruto asked eagerly. The attention whore in him was curious, damn it. Truth, kid. What Kakashizen put you through would have killed lesser people. Sure as hell would have killed me when I was your age. I'm sure you paid a heavy price with broken bones and contusions day after day, but no one in ANBU Corps doubts the price wasn't worth it. I mean, you faced Orofucking and lived. There ain't many that can claim that. And everyone in ANBU regrets not having been there for the Chunin exam finals. Team 7 grinned in elation. And the grilling continued. Jiraiya patted his friend Yakushi Kabuto on the back to steady the boy, half a kilometer from Team 7 and Tripod. The Sannin and the traitor Twisover were hidden behind a crop of trees flanked by ANBU and assorted nin. Their position overlooked the entrance to the safe house where Oto remnants were holed up. The holdouts were the very ones whose loyalty to the late Orochimaru was weak and who could be turned, if Kabuto was to be believed, and thus, ripe for the turning. Relax, Kabuto, there's nothing to fear, the Sannin said, fixing the spectacled medical genius with a look. Jiraiya was fully aware that Orochimaru's pet gopher might have lied about his friends, one reason why the boy was going in alone to convince them to come out and surrender. If he'd lied, or had somehow arranged an ambush, as far-fetched as that idea was, this was the time to back out and beg for his life. Kabuto chuckled light-heartedly. He thought he managed to mask his nervousness, but to a seasoned spy as Jiraiya, it was as plain as light of day. But the Sannin didn't give away the fact he'd read his prey's discomfiture. Let the medic underestimate him at his own risk. In you go, he said. How much time do you think you'll need? Probably most of the day. They're going to be nervous. Konoha hasn't exactly been kind and gentle with their comrades these past few weeks. Jiraiya shrugged. The Hokage's orders were to summarily behead captured Oto nin unless they surrendered without a fight. Those that did were arrested and interned in camps under observation. The plan was to track down their families, take them hostage and relocate the nearest of kin to Konoha to convince the nin to switch allegiance to Fire. But there had been precious few prisoners so far and the Sannin thought he knew why. Orochimaru was reviled like nothing else in Konoha and ANBU hated him even more. Leaf Shinobi were simply not accepting most offers of surrender. That can't be helped, he said cheerily. If it helps, tell them I have enough men under my command to raise their little hole to the ground and grind everyone in it to dust. Kabuto nodded and, firming his resolve, approached the hideaway. Kimamaro's condition had continued to deteriorate. Nothing Karen did helped. The other fugitives were grateful for her presence and over the course of the last couple of days, had slowly begun to look to her for leadership. Anyone who could control a maniac like Jugo was leader material, as far as they were concerned. Karen, for her part, knew that it was only a matter of time before the bone wielder died. It wasn't just his disease that was killing him, but something else. If she didn't know better, she'd have thought that Kabuto had poisoned her patient. But right now, Kimamaro's impending demise was the last thing on her mind. She had far more immediate concerns. Like what Kabuto's chakra was doing in the neighborhood mixed with numerous others. Had he sold them all out, Karen knew Kabuto and his capacity for betrayal well, or had he reached an accommodation with Konoha to spare their lives? Before she could make up her mind and order an escape through the tunnel leaving behind only a sacrificial guard, Kabuto forced her hand by approaching the entrance himself. Karen glared at the senior medic as the latter climbed down the slippery ladder. "This ladder's a death trap," he quipped in a tone that screamed flippant to Kunoichi. "Are there Konoha nin outside, Kabuto?" she asked, ignoring his comment altogether. "Why," he replied with a smile, his hands out in front where she could see them, "yes, of course." Jiraiya was quite insistent on bringing help. Whatever else Kabuto may have had in his mouth went unsaid as one of the bystanders shoved him against the wall. The marks of the curse seal began to spread across the aggressor's body. "You traitor! I ought to kill you here and now," the boy growled. "Tenchi, stand down," Karen ordered him, as much to exert control over the situation as to calm Jugo. Tenchi was a good fighter, but he wasn't the brightest bird in the flock. And Jugo was all too willing to go on one of berserker rages, distressed as he was by Kimamaro's condition. To Kabuto, she said, "Please explain." Kabuto nodded. He was actually glad that Karen appeared to be in command of the cutthroats. He had hoped someone would be, for otherwise odds were about even he'd get his throat slit for going to the trouble of saving the ingrates. It also helped that he had worked with her extensively before and knew her to be pragmatic in these things. A kindred soul, even. "I convinced Jiraiya to spare our lives. He's here to accept our surrender." "And the others with him?" one of the others asked heatedly. "Would you come here alone if you were in his place?" Kabuto shot back. Then, aloud, "Where's Kimamaro? Has his condition improved in the last week?" Hidden behind the wall of bodies in the back, Jugo relaxed at Kimamaro's bedside. He'd been ready to kill Kabuto if the medic had betrayed them, but he was glad that was not the case. Kabuto wouldn't be trying to heal the ailing Kagaya if he were really a traitor. "He's here in the back." The bloodline progenitor of the cursed seals spoke loud enough to be heard at the front, even as the others parted to make way for the medic. "Kimamaro's much worse," Karen added, guiding Kabuto to the Kagaya. Her eyes were strangely focused on the senior medic, a fact that did not escape her quarry, but slipped everyone else's notice. The way Kabuto met Karen's gaze unflinchingly, she knew for sure he meant everything but good health and a long life for Kimamaro. It did not even cross her mind to reveal the truth to the others, however, for she knew it was the right thing to do under these circumstances. One life quenched for many bequeathed. Calm as a hermit contemplating the mysteries of the universe, Kabuto took the seat Jugo evacuated. As Karen watched from the side, the mild-mannered medic used his skills to do a number on Kimamaro's lungs. Under the guise of a medical checkup. It was a good thing, she mused, that the Kagaya was unresponsive from the painkillers, or he would have given the game away under the excruciating pain. So, at the end of the checkup, when Kabuto stood up, Karen knew that he'd stolen what little time Kimamaro had left in the world. But she couldn't feel any pity for the Kagaya. Such was the world of Shinobi, and though the bone wielder was a friend, he would be the death of them all with his fanatical loyalty for Orochimaru if he lived. "I think we can save him if we get him to Konoha fast," Kabuto announced. The disease is too far gone and the only one who can possibly save him is Tsunade of the Sannin. Jugo brightened considerably. You think so? He asked. Kabuto nodded. I'm afraid he's not much for this world if he stays here. The Senju is his only chance. Then what are we waiting for? Jugo asked heatedly. Let's start for Konoha already. Several of the others looked askance at Karen. They did not trust Konoha to keep their word, but Jugo would make mincemeat of them if they objected. However, Karen was now a part of Kabuto's conspiracy. If there's even the slightest chance we can save Kimimaro, then we have to take it, she declared passionately. A few shoulders slumped in the back and others heaved a sigh of relief at the passing of immediate danger. They would deal with Konoha later, but right now, Jugo was the most immediate, and by virtue of that immediacy, also the biggest threat. A word of caution, however, Kabuto spoke in warning. It wouldn't do to have Jugo think that Kimimaro was saved and then have him die on the journey to Konoha. There was no telling what the crazy bastard would do if that happened, but if Leaf Shinobi became the target of the opprobrium, the spectacled genius knew what Jiraiya would do to him as repayment. Kimimaro's too sick. He may succumb to the rigors of travel. Jugo slumped visibly. We'll do everything to keep him safe and comfortable, Jugo, the medic Nin continued, but I don't want to get your hopes up until we reach Konoha. Jugo nodded understanding. After that, it was but the work of a few minutes to convince the others, and just like that, Konoha's strength had expanded by several dozen. It was late in the night and General Shinichi, commander of the forces defending T against Fire's imminent invasion, was fast asleep when his aide woke him up. The general was instantly awake and he knew as soon as he read the message that T was lost. Unlike most of his compatriots, who'd thought T couldn't win at all, he'd felt that country had a slim chance of holding off Fire before Snow and Rock were cajoled to intervene in his nation's favor. But now, the scale of the disaster ruled out any chance of fending off the invading army. 3rd and 5th regiments of Fire have broken through the southern flank, he bitterly read aloud an excerpt from the fateful message. Then to his aide, get me couriers. Are the command staff awake? I sent for both the couriers and the staff, sir. They should be arriving at the command tent now. I also sent for the cook to prepare tea for everyone, sir. Shinichi nodded. We better get there ourselves, hadn't we? Inside the command tent, they found Shinichi's staff caught in a whirlwind of activity as officers asked for and got incomplete reports from their subordinates. A steady bunch walked in and out of the tent as the whole camp quickly came alive, and couriers hurried to the command tent and patiently awaited their summons. Shinichi beckoned for the couriers after casting an experienced eye over the chaos inside the tent. He judged it as having the right tempo and sense of urgency. My compliments to Major Taira. He is to make haste with the 7th and 14th Infantry Battalions to the southern flank and using Hill 34 as the anchor on the right flank, form a defensive line perpendicular to our main battle line. His orders are to hold firm until relieved and to defend the units on the front from flanking attacks. The nearest courier nodded and hurried away. Shinichi watched after the boy leave with a heavy heart. In his heart of hearts, he already knew his move would fail. Fire would have sent their most mobile troops and their damned ninja through that breach. And he did not doubt more reinforcements were streaming into T even now, but he had his duty and honor, and if he was to die, he would die like a man fighting to his last breath. Damn that traitor Kita Terajiro to 1,000 lifetimes in the darkest pits of hell, he cursed mentally. My compliments to Lieutenant Colonel Tachibana, Shinichi continued, his mind wandering back to the nigh impossible challenge at hand. He is to take command of 8th, 9th and 13th Infantry Battalions and 1st and 2nd Cavalry Battalions and counterattack the enemy. His orders are to plug the breach at all costs. The next courier nodded and made to leave. But before he could get on his horse, an arrow appeared as if by magic buried halfway into his right temple. And Shinichi knew that a shinobi was inside the camp proper. He just had a moment to curse the gods aloud while someone else inside the tent raised the assassin cry before his aide exploded in a fiery cataclysm. The explosion blew the command tent and everyone inside it sky-high, leaving few survivors. Without Shinobi to play counternin and defend high-value targets, and with one entire flank wide open, Root had smuggled an assassin team right into the camp. After that, it had taken less than a minute to Genjutsu Shino's aid when the major bore the news of Terajiro's betrayal to the general. At this crucial moment, they detonated the unwilling suicide bomb in the nerve center of the entire front. That night, as T units reeled and were hammered from attacks from front and the rear ever widening the breach, Root carried out 7 other missions deep inside T, striking at supply bases. They also captured key communication stations along the front line, and sent confusing messages both to the front line and the capital that put the whole front in disarray come morning. "What's your name?" Karen asked the blonde teen after the camp was struck and the evening meal shared. Naruto glared at her in return. He felt insulted that an enemy of Konoha dared speak to him. "Don't glare at me," the redhead seethed, her temper getting the better of her. Naruto's glare did not abate and Sasuke joined him. "Naruto, Sasuke, shut up," Sakura barked, noticing the unfriendly looks the other prisoners shot her teammates. Sometimes, the boys were such idiots. There was only one reason that Jiraiya and Anbu would go to so much trouble to smuggle Oto-nin into fire masquerading them as civilians, and she and the dumbass had discussed the subject just the day before. Too bad their brains suffered from chronic testosterone poisoning. Her words earned Sakura a glare from her teammates. That is, until she bopped them on the head. "Idiots. They aren't the enemy anymore. Or did you forget the talk we had yesterday?" Naruto had the sense to look ashamed. Sasuke continued to glare. The raven-haired genin was a stubborn son of a bitch when he chose to be. "Don't mind them," Sakura told the redhead Pow, "they don't mean any harm." Karen looked doubtful. "The blonde's Naruto, the ravenhead Sasuke and I'm Sakura. We're genin." Karen frowned dismissively, though she was curious. What were genin doing in the company of Anbu and a Sannin? As if sensing her thought, Naruto popped his shoulders. "Let's spar, Pinky." "Usual rules, Yuke." Watching the spar, Karen learned grudging respect for Team 7 and Konoha. They had seen it before in the professionalism and efficiency of Leaf Anbu, but the skill the genin demonstrated stamped in their hearts the true might of the most powerful village in the land. Jiraiya stared at Team 7 speculatively for the longest while. "When did you figure it out?" he asked finally. "It wasn't that hard when your civilians have powerful chakra and we've been taking the utmost care to maintain secrecy about moving our prisoners," Naruto replied. Jiraiya thought about it and nodded. "Very well. You're part of this compartment now. You can't share information about our prisoners or even betray you possess knowledge about them to anyone else unless authorized by the Hokage, the council, the Anbu commanders and I." Team 7 nodded. "Good. Dismissed." The war was going badly for T. In 1 week, Konoha had crippled their navy at port and Fire followed that move by sinking the surviving remnants at sea. Fire's army had also advanced 100 miles into the country, encircling 7 regiments in a pocket between the naval landings on the northern coast and the lightning-fast pincer in the south. All efforts to relive the trapped units had been unsuccessful and after losing most of one of the 2 last combat-ready regiments, abandoned in favor of defending the capital. That was 2 days back and official word of their surrender came yesterday evening. Rumors ran rampant as the capital's militia and whatever units could be scrapped together rushed about strengthening the defensive works, but the citizenry were close to panicking and an atmosphere of gloom and doom had seized the city. The steady stream of refugees running away from the front line past the capital certainly did not help the undercurrent of terror. The conditions were ripe for a riot among the civilians and route operators smuggled into the city started it with a liberal dose of sabotage and arson. And as the granary went up in smoke as well as 2 watchtowers and several public buildings, plus the numerous peasants killed more or less at random in main thoroughfares, the city exploded in unrest. When word finally reached the port about the riots in the capital, Vice Admiral Muromachi knew what to do. Konoha Nin had done a number on his fleet and crippled it, but they had left behind the port infrastructure intact after they fired up large sections of the city. It would have served Leaf and Fire best to have their ninja hold it until they were relieved, but someone on their side must have screwed up and they hadn't. So, as his country crumbled around him, Muromachi was left staring at a golden opportunity to prick his enemies and to deny them the ability to field a significant naval arm for some years to come. He knew that his orders would probably cost him his life when the Fire Daimyo learned about it, but if Hai no Kuni ever got its naval arm, rock and snow wouldn't be able to liberate it this side of eternity. So, Ensign, get me Captain Satsuma and Commander Momoyama. Fast. The ensign saluted smartly and left without a word. He returned 5 minutes later with the captain and the commander. Gentlemen, please be seated, Muromachi said. The war is lost. All that is left is for the politicos in the capital to surrender, which after 2 days of riots among the population, won't be long now. But that's not why you're here. I summoned you both to discuss plans for firing up the port infrastructure and for planning the insurrection to come afterwards. How should we go about it? Satsuma frowned in thought for a moment. We have plenty of timber in the warehouses, sir, he said. Yes? We could pile the timber on the locks and pumps of the graving dock, soak them with fuel and set them on fire. We could also do the same with the damaged ships and destroy their superstructure. There's no point in scuttling the ships in shallow water, but if we can damage them enough, it'd take them lots of time in the yard before they can set sail again, Momoyama elaborated. It was clear that both officers had already discussed this at length, smart and aggressive as they were, which was exactly why the admiral had called for them. Set parties to work on that right away. Also, see about firing up the fuel tanks as well. And dump the rations into the sea. Let the damned bastards bear the cost of feeding the civilians, Muromachi supplied. Satsuma thought about it for a moment. They would simply have to ensure that the food supplies brought in by the fire people were stolen or destroyed en route. Yes, sir. Get on it. We'll disperse into the countryside once the work is done, leaving behind only a small guard. The gates of Konoha bristled with ninja as Jiraiya's party and escort reached the walls of the village. While guards rushed about processing prisoners, Jiraiya approached Team 7 who were busy chatting with Tripod, their minder for the concluded journey. Well, that's it kids, he said. Sorry we couldn't spend as much time together as I wanted. But it's straight to ANBU training for you and we'll meet again in 6 months. Team 7 nodded. Till we meet again. Work hard and enjoy ANBU life. The village needs you for the next war. We will be ready, Jiraiya-sensei. Yes, you will. Jiraiya smiled fondly. They were well-behaved kids, really, and Minato would have been proud of Naruto and his friends. He certainly could not wait to see what the future held in store for them. Excerpts from National Intelligence Estimate on Fire Country submitted to the Daimyo of Cloud.int. Fire's successful rebuilding effort of the country's infrastructure has brought renewed prosperity and has reduced popular support for the insurrection. Patriots of the disposed regime are finding it increasingly hard to operate within the land as support for the nationalist cause is fast disappearing among the population. The window of opportunity obtained by Muromachi's actions during the final days of Fire's conquest of tea is now closed. Thanks to the strategies devised by Sarutobi Hiruzen, the retired 3rd Hokage of Konoha and commander of Root Division of Fire's Ninja Corps, counterinfiltration operations have increased vastly in effectiveness to the extent that 7 of the last 8 insertion attempts by both Rock and Cloud have ended in failure. The port and the shipyard have now been open for 2 years and the blue water approaches to T are now heavily patrolled, starving the insurgents of essential supplies of the materials of war. In conclusion, the insurgency in Tea is no longer sustainable at the level of the first 2 years. Even though more than 3 years have passed since the disposal of the Yondaime Kazekage, and in spite of the close friendship between the Godaime Kazekage and the Daimyo of Wind, Suna continues to remain a shadow of its former glory. Owing to a number of tragedies that have befallen Sand Shinobi operating outside the walls of the hidden village over the course of the last year, and the growing unpopularity and disillusionment with the government on 3 of the 7 provinces in the country, the position of the daimyo has worsened. Intelligence strongly suspects Leaf's hand in both instances, though incontrovertible evidence has so far eluded all investigating agencies. This state of affairs is regrettable, as the daimyo is unable to act decisively against fire so long as he faces a divided population at home. Though it couldn't have been foreseen, the ascension of Wave as a major trading partner to fire and a prominent export hub, as well as the cozy relationship they share with Hai no Kuni, is cause for concern. Wave has recently concluded an agreement with Fire to station one of the latter's regiments within their borders close to the port through which passes 10% of Cloud's external trade merchandise as of date. There is evidence of a Konoha Black Ops element operating within Wave's border with impunity, though both Fire and Wave have denied it. Furthermore, a total of 20 friendly port calls were made by Fire Navy at Wave's capital in the last 6 months, whereas Wave has refused our offer of army and naval elements to protect their boundaries. Wave has thus become a cause of concern, and rumors of a Jinchuriki of the Kyubi persist. There is now enough evidence to conclude that there is such a shinobi in Konoha's ranks, though the appearance and description of the nin vary. Moreover, the Godaime Hokage hasn't deigned to return the Ichibi to rightful owners in Suna. Since the One Tail is a carefully held secret in Hidden Leaf, there are concerns about whether it has been sealed into another to forge a new weapon. Such a state of affairs is unacceptable as. However, evidence points that Akatsuki, see report TSS 193 JD 89 for details, are also unaware of the Ichibi's location. Since the Cabal is markedly belligerent towards Konoha and has demonstrated their superior intelligence-gathering abilities in overtures made to Cloud and Rock Courts, it appears probable that the fate of the One Tail will remain unknown for some time to come until Leaf acts. Interestingly, reports say that Akatsuki's failure in this regard has delayed the execution of the shadowy organization's plans. The question why the mercenaries would seek out the tailed beast is unanswered. Intelligence considers this a cause for concern, as their plans may include designs on our own strategic weapons as well. In conclusion, with their newly assimilated territories and their enhanced military might, prosperity and political influence, and continuing lawlessness in Wind fostered by Fire's interference, Hai no Kuni is now the greatest threat to the status quo in the elemental countries and the biggest threat to Cloud's sovereignty. The tea was subpar today. This tea is shit, Naruto bemoaned, waving his cup in the air. What else can you expect in a rundown establishment as this one? Sasuke pointed out from across the table, gesturing with his sake saucer at the opulent surroundings. Seeing as how the establishment was the most expensive in Konoha and catered mostly to the affluent, the majordomo had every reason to look offended. 2. Bad for him, he was too cultured to throw Team 7 out on their asses right then and there. And you're a wanker, Naruto retorted loudly, sitting there swilling your precious sake, ignoring your unfortunate friend who has been cursed to drink this vile cat piss. Well, fuck you. You're the one who wanted tea when Sakura and I were content with sake. A gentleman and his lady friend in the center of the room hastily paid their bill and cleared the building. Sakura, seated at the third side facing the restaurant's aghast patrons, covered her head in shame. It was as if her teammates went out of the way to embarrass her in public. Bastard! Naruto barked even more loudly. Why I should gut you, then cut off your balls and use them to shut your trap right where you sit. And I should strangle you with your intestines and paint the walls red with your blood, you pussy, Sasuke replied in an equally loud and vehement voice. Another patron left the building in a hurry. The exchange would definitely have continued further had not the majordomo approached the table. Yes, dear fellow? Naruto asked, putting on cultured airs. After the performance of the last minute, no one was fooled. I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises, sir, the man said. Sasuke looked affronted. Well, the tea is shit anyways, he said pleasantly, rising to his feet. And the ambience sucks donkey's balls, Naruto added helpfully for the majordomo's benefit. You might want to look into it, but seriously, what's a tea house without hookers? 2 minutes later. Ow! 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 Twin cries of pain resonated through the street as Sakura dragged her teammates by their ears. All I wanted was something nice and quiet for a change, and some decent eats, she griped, picking up her pace. You two had to ruin it, didn't you? The objects of her ire did not answer her. The pain from their distended ears was simply unbearable. Well, come on then. We'll do things your way. But I swear, one of these days I'm going to make you wear skirts and sing soprano. Naruto winced. Ami, his girlfriend in Wave, would kill him if she lost her favorite plaything. However, he was glad that Sasuke, who'd normally make fun of him at this point, was otherwise engaged in sharing his torment. It was easy for the raven-haired Uchiha, seeing as how he preferred the government-run whoring houses for rest and relaxation whenever he wanted, which wasn't often. Fortunately, 10 minutes of excruciating agony later, they reached the common bath. Sure enough, Jiraiya, their teacher, was busy peeping. Is the hall any good, you old fart? Naruto shouted, intentionally. Sakura-kun wants to know if there's any delectable piece of naked ass in there. If there is, she wants to hit it tonight. And hit it, Sakura did. Naruto's head, that is. Naruto shook his head to banish the birdies as Jiraiya cursed his students for disturbing the pursuit of his true art and calling. Remind me to kick. Your ungrateful ass, brats, he complained as he pulled his students away from the compromised peeping hole. Not one day in Konoha and he'd have to search for another one, no thanks to his disciples. Where are we going, sensei? Naruto asked once he recovered. To meet the Godame. Yeah, like you didn't know already, Sasuke said, contributing his 2 cents. You know what, Sasuke? You diddle goats. Well, you fuck ducks in your spare time. And you suck mastodon cock. Quit it, you too. Jiraiya warned as they approached the Hokage tower. The ANBU guard gave Jiraiya a brief bow and swung the door open. Team 7 had dressed their ranks as soon as they were under the roof of the hallowed institution. They now entered the room in file, trailing Jiraiya. Haruno, Uzumaki and Uchiha reporting for duty from training mission as ordered, sir. Sakura, who stood front and center, snapped. Kakashi put down his quill and cracked a smile behind his mask as he looked Team 7 up and down. His kids were grown up and become adults. His eyes met Jiraiya's and the old legend flashed a wry grin back. Sit down, he told them. The foursome made themselves comfortable and the Hokage's secretary served them black tea without sugar. That was the way Kakashi preferred his tea and he made it a point to serve everyone except visiting dignitaries the concoction. Less than a day in Konoha after a 3-month away tour in tea and already I have a complaint lodged against your team, Haruno, Kakashi said after the Chunin was done. Jiraiya relaxed. Yeah, he'd catch some flack about the lack of discipline on his students later, but it wasn't what he'd feared. No one had reported on his peeping. Not that they ever did, mind, but there was always a first time for everything and he so did not want there for that meeting. Why, his reputation with the ladies would be in tatters if the information got out. Sakura hesitated, request the Hokage to be more specific and state the incident in the complaint. Naruto snickered in the background. As did Sasuke. Today had been a fun day for them both. 3 months away in that hellhole tea, they deserved a little chance to unwind on the return. They'd apologize to the civvies later, but the pranks were just too good to pass up at that time. Kakashi glared at his truant little darlings. Promoted 10 times in the last 3 years between the 3 of you and demoted 7 times back, he said. Unfortunately, I can't even throw you in the brig this time around. There's an rank mission and it might be right up your alley. So, you're it. The part about throwing them in the brig was a lie. At least this time. The offended parties were only civilians, after all. Fairly high-ranking ones, but civilians, nonetheless. But the brats had to kept on a tight leash during or things quickly spiraled out of control. Still, Kakashi loved playing these games with his children. Too bad they didn't have enough time in their hands this time to figure out if he was bluffing or not and do something about it. The smoldering corpses of the minions of that vulture Danzo strewn across the ground before him was pure heaven. The masked sand Nin pushed at one of them with his leg and the target's appendage came ripping apart. The Anbu chuckled at the sight. Just how he preferred his leaf brethren. Well cooked and burnt to a crisp. The sand shinobi turned to his compatriots and signaled retreat. Vultures were circling overhead already, minutes after the massacre, and Danzo's own would come to investigate in force. It was every Sunanin's most cherished dream to mix it up with those hidden leaf bastards and teach them a lesson, but today was not the day. Even though that day drew nigh, wind and sand stood to benefit a great deal more if their enemies in fire and leaf remained unaware of the strong allies and weapons in their possession till the very end. We think that the disappearances are part of a covert operation to weaken fire's foothold in wind. From the reports that our agent in Danzo's camp sent us, as well as Danzo's own official reports, we think that there's a possibility that one or more Shrank ninja are lending assistance to Suna. Missing Nin? Naruto asked. He'd read the intelligence reports. There were numerous rank Nin in Suna's ranks, but none were Shrank. Danzo had seen to that. Say what you will about the old war hawk, but he was good at brainwashing and training fanatics for suicidal missions. Or ninja on loan from one of the other villages, Kakashi amended. So we go in and kill them? Not precisely. Before you ask, I'll get to that part in a little while. As you know, Wind has also been making noises about the depredations of its citizens by Danzo's men. They stationed a regiment of samurai close to Danzo's camp about a year back and have been reinforcing the same periodically. There are now 2 regiments in the area and another one within a day's march. Plus the assorted shinobi loitering around in the area on any given day. Without the Sunanin, the regiments aren't really a threat except to the odd unlucky ninja. With them, Danzo will be crushed if Wind moves. And our mission is to ensure that doesn't happen? Sasuke asked. Kakashi shook his head in the negative. No, he did not want the crippled asshole assassinated. While it is true that Danzo dead does not serve Fire's interests, neither does Danzo alive and powerful. Our reports are very clear on this. He is still plotting a coup to overthrow me. A short-sighted idiot if there ever was one, as sand was ripe for his taking all along. But that's neither nor there. And no, I don't want you to assassinate the old coot, he clarified, catching the look on Sasuke's face. What is the mission then, sensei? Sakura asked. Kakashi smiled. To protect Fire's interests, what else? You will report to Danzo in Wind. Ostensibly, you will work under him, carrying out his orders. He will instruct you to track whoever's taking out his units and neutralize them. This is part of your real mission as well. Only you will not carry out the execution with undue haste. You will wait until Danzo is sufficiently weakened before you strike against them. On the side, you will weaken Suna by hunting any patrols that stray outside their walls. This will force Sand to recall its men attached to the regiments besieging Danzo, allowing him to operate freely once again. We keep on pricking Wind until they lose patience and opt to use a hammer to deal with the thorn in their side, at which time, we'll claim injustice and send our forces to enforce the law, Sakura stated. What Fire and Konoha wanted is wind as an ally in the coming war. But since that's not possible, we're willing to settle for neutrality. Even if that neutrality is forced on them by a sword at their neck, which is why Danzo is so useful where he is. The three root members nodded. Kakashi pushed forward a scroll. A list of assets in wind that you may find useful. Memorize and burn. Sakura pocked the scroll silently. Finally, I'll say it again. Whatever you do, don't kill the old coot. When Kiba walked into the restaurant to rendezvous with his team, a rare sight met him. The prodigal Team 7 were having a quiet conversation with his teammates and eating lunch. Kiba's eloquence with the finer points of the spoken language came into play at that point and he waxed poetic. Well, tattoo my butt and bugger my puckered ass if it isn't Naruto. How are you doing, buddy? And you too, Sasuke, Sakura. I see you're as foul-mouthed as ever, friend Kiba. Join us as we pay homage to the fine victuals that yon chef has kindly prepared for our luncheon, quoth Naruto. Kiba starred goggle-eyed. When he recovered, he pointed an accusing finger at Sasuke. Dude, when did he take you to the gay side? Right about the time you started raping alley cats, Sasuke retorted. Sakura guffawed. This was simply too good a chance to pass up. Don't tell me you two have been doing the horizontal mambo behind my back, Naruto. Naruto glared at his pink-haired teammate. Kiba laughed and grabbed a seat. And drop that shallow, cultured act, you bastard, he intoned. An idiot could see through it. Fuck you, too, Kiba. Kiba snorted. As I was saying, Shino interrupted, we haven't seen you guys in over a year since we last met in Wave. Long mission? Kind of. We were stationed in T. It wasn't precisely true, as Team 7 had performed other operations elsewhere, but for the purposes of this conversation, Naruto thought it would do. In fact, we stepped into Konoha only this morning, Sakura added. Kiba nodded. Them ANBU captains are working you like crazy, huh? Sakura smiled. Yes, as a matter of fact. And throw in all the training that Jiraiya Sensei's been giving us and we have little time on our hands. Well, we're glad we're just regular nin. Aren't we, Hinata? The Inuzuka asked. To Team 7, before the Hyuga could reply, we're on R for the next 2 weeks and then back to training before deployment again. Sakura's smile grew bigger. Kiba knew from prior experience that he did not like the look on her face at all. She'd smiled that same smile before she kicked him in the balls 2 years back. We know. Oh? Shino asked with a quirked eyebrow. His bug senses were spiking and he feared bad things were about to happen to his team's well-earned RNR. Yeah, we're heading out for a mission today and turns out we need trackers. We checked with HQ and guess what we learned? And guess who just volunteered to be our trackers? Oh man. Kiba moaned. He had dates and plans for those dates. Ano, Hinata interrupted in that shy voice of hers, where are we going? Kaze no Kuni. Team 8 nodded. They were curious but knew better than to pry into ANBU operations. They would track whoever needed to be tracked and lend whatever other assistance they could to the mission. And then, after the mission ended, they'd keep their mouths shut and forget all about it. North Gate at 1500. Pack rations for 3 days. The Suna ANBU walked into the clearing. He was alone. White on black, darker than dark, he said, speaking the agreed-upon code from the last meeting. Might is right, retorted his IWA counterpart. The Kazekage expresses his gratitude for the loan. The Tsuchikage will be pleased to hear that. The Suna ANBU nodded. Our strategy to keep Danzo confined is working. We expect success in another month. That is good. Code for next meeting? You choose. My end, orange. Yours, night. Rendezvous, third on the list. The IWAANBU nodded and departed as per prior agreement. He or whoever else was designated to attend the meeting would be there for the rendezvous. The Suna ANBU remained at his position for a couple of minutes before he too left. Soon, very soon, Wind and their allies would move, and Konoha and Hai no Kuni would get their just desserts. She rose up and stretched cat-like. It was twilight and she signaled her men to break camp. Then she grabbed a bite of the ration bar, and the roasted snake and rat. The snake wasn't bad as snakes roasted on the field went, but the rat was excellent. There was something about the rats in Kaze no Kuni that made them delectable snacks. This was good because she loved rats. Briefly, she wondered about capturing a couple at the end of the mission and taking them home to breed. That way, she could have more of these wonderful morsels whenever she wanted. "You want another snake?" one of her companions asked. "No," she replied. "I'll have another rat now and then a Konoha rat later. I have an urge to try one of those today." The man laughed. "Don't we all?" he said, throwing her a canteen. "Watered down sake?" she asked. He nodded. "Good. Let's hope that tonight we catch something because the cat is just raring to play again." "So, what's going on, Naruto?" Kiba asked once the others had turned in for the night. They were still within fire and some teams would have foregone the night watch or had only one, but both teams were paranoid enough that there were two. As for the choice for the watch, Kiba and Naruto were good buddies as were Shino and Sasuke. Sakura and Hinata got along well enough, and Sakura was allergic to Kiba. Also, everyone had agreed that putting two Dojutsu users on the same watch wasn't prudent. Naruto, who was seated with his back to Kiba, formed a bunch of Kage Bunshin and sent them out. "We're not going to assassinate Danzo, if that's what you're wondering." "I didn't think so. You wouldn't need my team if it were straight-out assassination." "You would be surprised," Naruto muttered. "But getting back on track, there are forces at work in Wind right now that are disturbing the status quo established after Suna's humiliation. We're going there as troubleshooters to re-establish balance." "Re-establish balance," Kiba repeated. One could hear the smirk in his voice as he spoke. "I assume then that heads are going to roll. And it's going to rain blood," Naruto appended. "Which is where you come in. I can live with that. So long as you leave me and my teammates some. There'll be plenty to go around," Naruto replied. "So what's happening in your life?" "As Shino said, been some time since we saw you. I'd have given you up for dead if it weren't for the fact that we heard regular hearsay about your numerous and varied escapades at whorehouses, clubs, and such. Especially the whorehouses." "That's good to hear," Naruto replied. "It's hard work being a legend in the making, and it gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling that all that effort is paying off when my fans acknowledge me." Kiba chuckled. "So I guess you don't have a girlfriend." "You guessed wrong." "Fat, ugly chick with mustache?" Kiba asked. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Why are we talking about your mom and sis?" he asked innocently. "I thought we were talking about my girlfriend." "I'm gonna kill you first thing tomorrow morning, you bastard," Kiba gritted back. Naruto chuckled. "You're welcome to try. Anyways, her name's Ami. You'd like her." "Dude, you have a girlfriend and you screw around? How are you still alive?" "Because she loves me. She understands the life we lead and the stresses we face every day doing our job." "Really? I have to meet this angel." Naruto shrugged. With war on the horizon and with the kind of life he and his teammates lead, chances were he'd end up dead on some obscure battlefield, without keeping his word to Kiba if he gave it. We'll see how things turn out. In the meanwhile, we have to come up with a way to prank Sasuke and Shino. Any ideas? "I hate this fucking country," the psychopath said to his partner. "You hate everything. So shut up. You're an asshole." Then, struck by a thought, I need to kill something. That's what we're here for, isn't it? The mercenary Theart said. I want dibs on the next one, you hear me? I don't want you to interfere. The mercenary shrugged. Not like I care. That's because you're a shite-eating, atheist asshole who doesn't respect blood. The mercenary did not reply. I'm talking to you, fucker. And I'm ignoring you. You prick. The mercenary stopped and turned. You continue to annoy me. You. A massive killer intent directed at him stopped the psychopath in his tracks. Most civilians and some shinobi would have dropped dead at its power, but he groaned in ecstasy. It was difficult to tell if it was religious fervor or sexual pleasure, and an insane smile blossomed on his face. For his part, the mercenary stood stock-still facing his partner as the latter's perversions took their course. His eyes, however, glinted at a murderous temper held barely in check and promised a violent, bloody end to the object of his ire. A minute later, the psychopath finally shook himself out of his ardor and cracked his head. Now, that was pleasant. Could we do that again? He asked. Fortunately for his sake, the mercenary's anger had abated some. He snorted in disgust and turned to face towards the road. We have a job to do, and that's to kill Konoha ninja. We will do it expeditiously, or I will dice you into little pieces and serve the slop to pigs. Are we clear? If the psychopath felt threatened, he showed no sign of it. Instead, he spit on a bush on the side of the road, adjusted the weapon at his back and started walking. His partner glared at his retreating back for a few seconds and then followed him. The pig slop was looking more attractive all the time. Maybe he should do it after this mission. As an experiment. It was high noon and the heat was stifling. Teams 7 and 8 waited patiently under the merciless sun as the samurai at the head of their line took their sweet time processing travel requests. Half an hour later, with Kiba's and Naruto's patience at an end, they were finally only a couple of bodies from getting their visas stamped. Damn paperwork Nazis, Naruto groused, kicking a pebble hard. Sakura shrugged. It was the price of doing business. They were entering Wind as an official Konoha investigation team and had to go through the forms, which in this case meant standing in line for the border stamps. Naruto snorted. He understood the need, but that did not have to mean he had to agree with it. He turned to Kiba to say something, but a commotion at the head of one of the other lines grabbed his attention. What's going on? He asked Sakura with a nudge and a nod in the direction of the turmoil. Sakura shrugged again, though her eyes were focused intently on the man arguing with the Sunanin behind the desk. She was particularly interested since the man wore a badge of the Courier Corps on his right shoulder. The two looked like they might come to blows, which the messenger would have lost rather badly, but after a tense few seconds, the courier threw the cap of his trade on the floor and stomped out with his diplomatic case in hand. Sakura finger-tapped Naruto on the shoulder and gestured in the courier's direction. She would hold his place for him while he struck a conversation with the man and learned what happened. Messengers were not denied entry even when two countries were at war, and yet, Wind had seen fit to turn this one away. The incident was not relevant to their mission in any way, but it kindled her curiosity, and she knew so would her superiors at ANBU HQ. Naruto shook his head and walked after the fast-departing messenger. Maybe he could grab a bite or two while he was interrogating the man. And if he couldn't make it back before they passed customs, he would link up with his team later that night when they struck camp. The messenger roamed around the small market on the far side of the border for a while before he entered a roadside eatery. Naruto entered the small, family-run restaurant and immediately spotted the courier seated at the counter. The place was practically empty, and deciding that the best approach was the direct approach, the blonde adjusted his Konoha-issued forehead protector and walked up to the man. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. The courier turned sideways, and looked the teen up and down with a deep frown on his face. "It's not," he said, turning back. Naruto sat down and ordered lunch. "Having a bad day?" I'm Shigemi Hishinuma, he introduced himself, using one of his cover identities as a Konoha jounin. ANBU and route operators on foreign soil used covers even when not on mission. The people who mattered knew who they were and they did not care to let the rest know. Silence. I reason why I'm asking is because I saw what happened back there at the border crossing. The courier's back stiffened and he turned to face Naruto. Who's asking? Naruto gestured at his headband. I have nothing to say to you, the man replied. If I have anything, I'll say it to your superiors in Konoha or better yet, to the daimyo's representatives. So, there really was a problem. Naruto understood that the man had every right to distrust a stranger, but he needed the information. The success of the mission hinged on Suna and Win's disposition towards Konoha and Fire and his team's ability to make them see reason. Glancing sideways at his companion, the blonde thought he knew how to get the man to open up. Jiraiya had given Team 7 a most thorough education and one of the subjects had been on handling people the right way so as to extract useful information from them. If you don't have to, you don't have to, Naruto replied and slid a couple of ryu over. The courier gazed at the currency proffered for a couple of seconds and turned away in apparent disgust. I'm not to be bought, the man said in a clipped voice. Of course. Nevertheless, the route operator slipped another gold coin across with a clink. This was an age-old game and the Toad Sannin had taught his students how to play it well. The courier still hesitated. Naruto slipped another halfway across. I can't break my professional code of ethics, the man muttered. Naruto moved the coin 3/4 of the way. No one's asking you to. But you can gripe about your day to the owner. The man thought about it and reached for his gold. Naruto smiled and took his finger off the last piece. When the owner bought their steaming lunch, his newfound friend groused loudly in great and intricate detail as the proprietor listened patiently. Clearing customs had meant another hour spent standing on the queue and by the time Naruto got his papers stamped and reached camp, the sun had set. Also, the food was cold and everyone was ready to turn in for the night. As there was still a full day's march ahead of them and his discovery did not have any immediate implications for the mission, he ate the food and went to sleep. The next morning, during breakfast, he told the others what he'd learned. That does not bode well for relations between wind and fire, Shino said when the blonde was done. Naruto shrugged. It wasn't as if things weren't already heading up shit creek. We knew that things were a little heated up on the fire-wind border, but why deny entry to a courier carrying a diplomatic case? Kiba asked. Probably because he was carrying a diplomatic case, Sakura replied. They are trying to provoke an incident, Shino stated. Sakura got a thoughtful on her face. Yes. Unless he wasn't carrying the proper papers. Did you verify that, Naruto? Naruto grimaced as he chomped down on terrible-tasting ration bar. Yep, he replied with a half-full mouth. We'll have to tentatively conclude that Wind is trying to provoke an incident. Stupid fuckers, Sasuke added helpfully. So we'll file a diplomatic protest and that'll make them look bad. What'll gain from that? Kiba asked. What if they claimed that the courier did not have the proper papers and accused us of unfriendly acts? Hinata asked. But that wasn't what happened. None of the other countries like Konoha or Fire these days because of our power. Truth will not matter here, I suspect. They will accuse us of belligerent actions even though we're faultless, Sasuke replied. He did not bother explaining more. His team knew what that meant. You imply that Kaze no Kuni is colluding with foreign powers, Sasuke, Shino observed, shooting the raven-haired Chunin a significant glance. It was obvious that Team 7 had access to intel that his own teammates did not have. What sort of trouble were they walking into? Maybe. Danzo's only a day away and my guess is we'll know for sure when we get there. Danzo's camp had the feeling of a besieged fortress. Men naked at the waist were busy digging a second moat wider and deeper than the first, and the air rang with grunts at the backbreaking labor involved. Not surprisingly, given their predicament, the laborers were Konoha nin. As he passed through the gate, Naruto wondered how Danzo was managing security when a third of his men would be too tired at end of day and of no use. A few shinobi stood guard on the wooden ramparts, and Naruto had no doubt there were others that were on standby in the barracks. But Team 8 had not sensed or seen any Konoha nin more than 2 miles out where the Wind and Suna contingents had set up camp. That did not bode well for the morale of Danzo's men, and it deprived the old general of the intel he needed to predict enemy movements. Naruto glanced at his teammates and they nodded. "The camp looks forlorn," Naruto spoke to their escort. The kunoichi nodded. Gone was the swagger and arrogance with which Danzo's troops had greeted Konoha inspectors in the past, Naruto noted, remembering past intel reports. Now, they looked very grateful to see him and the others. If that wasn't an indicator that Danzo's dick was caught in the blocks, he didn't know what was. "Yeah, we lost 3 more patrols in the last week. 2 in a single night." "The patrols were operating close to each other?" Sakura asked. Their guide shook her head. Naruto looked at his friends. Either there'd been 2 teams operating all along, or Suna's hunters were confident enough to split their forces while going after Danzo's men. The day just kept getting better and better. "What's Danzo's done about it?" Sasuke asked. "That's Danzo-sama to you," the kunoichi snapped irritably. Sasuke grunted. He supposed he should show respect to the old cripple. For the present, at least. "What's Danzo-sama done about it?" he rephrased himself. "Pretty little. We've lost 100 men in the last month. Whoever's out there is very powerful, and we can't send enough men out because of those 2 damned regiments and those Sunanin bastards. The men are near mutiny." "I suppose that makes sense," Sasuke said doubtfully. What had happened to Danzo's supremely well-trained force of killers, he wondered. This was not the force reported as fearsome in the intel reports back home. Maybe Danzo had not brainwashed as many people as the Hokage's office had feared. If he'd expended most of them in suicidal assassination missions against Suna's elite, it explained the reality they discovered in his camp. Their guide took one last turn and led them to a large but utilitarian tent. "Danzo-sama's meeting a Wind diplomat," one of Danzo's aides said, nodding to the kunoichi. The man was dressed in plain shinobi garbs with no indication of his rank. "He instructed me to send you in as soon as you entered the camp. Wait inside and do not disturb until he's finished with the diplomat." Teams 7 and 8 nodded and entered. The Kaze no Kuni diplomat was a forceful man, who was secure in the belief that his person was inviolate and that he had everything going for him. He conducted himself aggressively, and even though he was in the middle of Danzo's camp surrounded by the latter's killers, he spoke down to the crippled ex-nin. Listening to his speech from one corner of the room, Naruto wondered if the man was a brave idiot or just another run-off-the-mill nincompoop that wore a bureaucrat's uniform. "We do not have control over what happens to you and your men," the official said in response to Danzo's complaint about his murdered men. He was sticking by the official Wind line on the subject. "If your men can go raping and looting, then they most certainly can live with the retaliations our civilians visit upon them." "Civilians don't butcher men like mine were," Danzo retorted. It galled him to confess the gory nature of the deaths inflicted on his underlings, but with Kakashi's spies around, he had to look as if he was trying to get his point across in a reasonable manner. Obviously, the diplomat pushed ahead, overriding the old Warhawk's protest, "You can neither control nor protect your own men, which says things about you and your village. No, Wind Country has had enough of your depredations on our poor but brave citizens. You would do well to remember that you are a guest in our land. We have evidence that the murders were committed by trained shinobi," Danzo reiterated. "So you say. Am I supposed to believe you when Konohagakure and Hai no Kuni have so much to gain from your accusations?" No, Kaze no Kuni will not abide it. However, in the interests of fairness and to prove our innocence to the world, we are willing to subject ourselves to an investigation conducted by a neutral third party. Danzo's eyes narrowed at the slip, and the diplomat, realizing his error in judgment, clamped down. He knew he'd unwittingly confirmed Danzo's suspicions. Wind, a secret ally against fire, and as a result, grown a backbone. That's how it is then, the old cripple said with an indulging smile. The fool of a diplomat could not know how big a favor he'd done Danzo's cause with that slip. Now that the idiot had blurted out the truth before Kakashi's spies, the Godame would be left with no choice but to send reinforcements. As much as the Hokage feared the former Root Supremo becoming too strong, he needed Suna and Wind weakened, and Danzo was the only one who could do it. I'll of course pass on your suggestion to Godaima-sama. We will wait for his decision. The diplomat nodded silently. He could not hide his regret about his indiscretion, but Danzo had no doubt the man would recover his balance in moments and surge back into the attack again. Now, the veteran shinobi said, intent on provoking the man further, that we've set aside the issue of the dead patriots. I would move on to the issue of the positioning of the 5th and 11th regiments so close to my base. Absolutely not, Wind's representative said in a tone of voice that left no room for doubt or argument. They're here to protect the civilian populace. They remain where they are. From his vantage point behind the diplomat and beside his teammates, Sasuke stopped picking his teeth for a moment. He shot a little grin at the man's back and chuckled his appreciation for saying that lie with a straight face. Wind's official stance might have held some weight if their troops were positioned anywhere near population centers. But seeing as the units straddled the only paved road to fire in that part of Wind, as well as the sole watering hole large enough to support a large party of men for 30 miles, and were so far removed from civilization that they needed dedicated mule trains to supply their comestibles thrice a week, it was not. The Uchiha's actions drew the attention of his teammates, who glared at him. In reaction, with nothing more than another shake of the head, he went back to concentrating on his toothpick. While Sasuke was interacting with his teammates thus, Danzo took the Wind envoy's argument in stride. It wasn't as if he'd expected the other to make concessions or even compromises. The diplomat did not know it, but the sole purpose of this conversation was for the benefit of Kakashi's spies, after all. He wanted them to impress the Godame about Wind's intolerable conduct in their reports and the necessity of sending reinforcements quickly to regain control on the ground. Perhaps you can have the shinobi complement reduced. I'm afraid there might be run-ins with my men when they go out foraging. Translation: if you don't move your men, I'll have mine kill them and claim it was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Wind expects Konoha shinobi within its borders to exercise due restraints. Suna obviously cannot be blamed if anything untoward happens. Translation: if you attack Sunanin and claim it was an accident, we'll take steps to ensure that your men have more accidents befall them in return. The meeting continued for a while longer, with both men issuing vague threats. The Wind official threw a lot of outright insults and insinuations at Danzo, who ignored them utterly and continued to bait the man. Finally, the two exchanged insincere toasts for friendship, peace and prosperity, and the diplomat left. Danzo waited until the eye was out of sight before turning his attention to Teams 7 and 8. Jounin Aburame Shino, and Chunin's Haruno Sakura, Inazuka Kiba, Hyuga Hinata, Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto reporting for duty, sir, Sakura announced as she and the others snapped to attention. Danzo cast an appraising eye over the six. Kakashi's brats and Kurenai's darlings, he muttered thoughtfully, massaging his chin with his ever-present cane resting against his leg. The Godame had finally seen fit to send me some decent help, I see. You got your billeting done? No, sir. We came to report as soon as we walked into camp, sir, Sakura replied. Danzo nodded. You want a briefing immediately, or do you want to see to your billeting? The briefing first, sir. Danzo seized his cane and walked to his desk. His aide slipped out on some task as he did. The situation is simple enough, he said once he slipped into his seat. The men I send out on patrols into the countryside are butchered like animals. I'm down 47 Kia and another 34 MIA in the last month. I've lost 30 in the last week. My surviving 300 are close to mutiny. It's a wonder they haven't done so already. Any other unit would have under these circumstances. As to the tactical picture, I'm penned in by 3 wind regiments as well as an estimated 250 Sunanin. You would have seen 2 of those regiments on the way here. The 3rd blocks the highway to the capital. There may be more shinobi in the countryside, but that's pure guesswork on my part. In essence, I'm trapped. Sakura nodded. Can you tell us about the attacks, sir? All except one were surgically executed ambushes by skilled ninjutsu users. The perpetrators are between 10 and 20 in number. There have been more attacks in the east and generally less time between attacks, leading me to suspect they're encamped somewhere in that neighborhood. Of course, I could be wrong. And the exception, sir? That was a bloody massacre. There was nothing more than pieces of flesh strewn around of that patrol when we found it 2 days back. Unfortunately, I couldn't contain the news and it spread throughout the camp, which is one reason aside from being cooped up in the camp why the men are so upset. You suspect it's a different team that did this? Oh, there's no doubt. The attack happened in the west on the same night as another in the east. Couldn't they have split up their forces and chosen a new modus operandi as part of their strategy? Danzo shrugged. Possible, I suppose. But unlikely. My men aren't weaklings and I'd wager it'd take more than your ordinary run of ninja to bring any of them down. Sakura nodded. I hope you caught the windbag slip back there. Danzo asked. Yes, sir. We're probably dealing with foreign shinobi and not nuke-nin. It's critical you find out who's helping Kaze no Kuni and Sunagakure. Yes, sir. You need anything? Yes, sir. I would like the autopsy reports of the dead men as well as your authorization to cut open some of them again. Granted. We will also need a guide, sir. Preferably someone who knows the area and is knowledgeable about the massacres. Danzo nodded absently. It wasn't as if he was going to let them roam around his territory without someone to watch over them, anyways. We will also need the latest intelligence reports on Wind and Suna troop movements, sir. Done. Anything else? Sakura thought about it. No, sir. Nothing that strikes me at present anyways, she said, turning a questioning glance at her teammates. When they did not say anything, she turned to Danzo and continued, if that is all, sir? We're dealing with a Jinchuriki, guys, Sakura said as soon as she walked into their tent. Naruto and the others stared at her. Sakura met their exasperated stares and finally noticed the stranger in their midst. She'd been so tired because of the autopsies and had been so preoccupied with thoughts of the Jinchuriki that she'd made a cardinal mistake. The man stood up to greet her. Sakura, this here's our liaison, Ishimatsu Shintani, Naruto introduced the stranger. Say hello to Sakura, Shin. Greetings, Sakura-san, Shintani said. Sakura nodded acknowledgement. Did I hear you right, Sakura-san? There's a bijou here in Kaze no Kuni? Naruto caught Sakura's eyes and shrugged. The cat was out of the bag and there was nothing to be done about it but to live with the consequences. Yes, that's right, Shintani-san. Please call me Shin. All my friends do, the man replied. I guess this means that one of the other villages is involved for sure. Yeah, Sakura replied before slipping into silence. Anything else, Sakura? Naruto asked. It was like Sakura to blame herself for anything that went wrong, though it really was her fault this time around, but they could not afford the traditional 1 day of recrimination before she turned around here. The more they learnt, the more it became clear that Suna and Wind's betrayal had caught Konoha off guard again because of Danzo's incompetence or connivance, and time was fast running out. In fact, things were so bad that he was going to have to send a warning to the Yondaime through Toad Mail this very evening. Yeah. The perpetrators are skilled at earth and fire justice, she replied, casting a look at Sasuke. The Uchiha Scion grinned and rubbed his hands in anticipation. He knew what the news meant for him with his lightning affinity. Finally, the maniac said, shaking his fist at the heavens. I get to kick a fucking bijou in its nuts all over the place. Dude, we're talking about a Jinchuriki, Kiba corrected him. Naruto put his hands on Kiba's shoulder and when he had the latter's attention, shook his head. Don't disturb him. The idiot's in his happy place. Team 8 looked at Naruto strangely. Really, how powerful were Team 7 to not even be perturbed by the thought of facing a demon host? Danzo looked askance at his informant. He hardly believed his ears. Surely, this was fortune smiling on him. It sure felt like he was basking in her radiance. Say again, he asked just to be on the safe side. Whoever's helping Wind lent them a Jinchuriki, Shintani repeated. Danzo's smile became blinding in its intensity. Finally, he could get his hands on a Jinchuriki of his own. This really was one of the happiest days of his life. Thank you, Ishimatsu, he said, dismissing the latter. Once the man had exited, he turned to his aide. Send out 24 of the 60, he said, referring to his hidden reserve of completely brainwashed shinobi, trained to be utterly loyal to Danzo and his cause. They were the most trusted of all the men under his command. Konoha didn't even know they existed, and they wouldn't hesitate to storm the gates of hell for their master. And get me that Jinchuriki alive. At all costs. Yes, master. The 5th Regiment guarded the watering hole, really a spring, on the road to fire. It was just past 4 in the morning when most of the camp was asleep and even the guards were drowsy when a toad bigger than a man floated to the surface. Out of its mouth emerged a hand, then another, then a head and finally, half a torso. Thanks, Gamakichi, Naruto whispered. Gamakichi did not reply. His voice had a lot of bass and might attract unwanted attention. Silently, Naruto pulled an oilskin pouch out of his shirt. Gingerly, he opened it and pulled out a water-soluble capsule a couple of inches in length and 2 centimeters in diameter. Inside, there was a crystallized cocktail of germs that gave a bad case of the runs, courtesy of Tsunade and her coterie of researchers in Konoha. If Wind thought that stationing a regiment close to a large body of water guaranteed water security, they would learn better in a couple of days when most of their camp got a bad case of dysentery. After all, there was no wood to heat water in the neighborhood and Wind, but curiously not Suna, frowned on booze. Kakashi stared at the letter from the Wind daimyo that lay on his desk. It was disturbing that it did not say anything about Danzo's men in Kaze no Kuni. What was even more so were the demands made in very strong language for the return of the Shikaku to Suna. That was unprecedented. In the 3 years since he put on the cap, there had been many polite requests for the one-tail from time to time. However, the Wind daimyo had never pressed the issue because there was an unspoken understanding that Konoha would not return the beast. While Kaze no Kuni had never been happy with the arrangement, they had no other option but to live with it. Now, something had happened that Leaf and Fire were not privy to, which had resulted in a U-turn in their policy. There was also Naruto's report, which lay beside the Wind daimyo's to consider. Sakura had discovered traces of Bijou chakra during her autopsy. That definitely ruled out any Sunanin and infinitely complicated things for Fire and Konoha. One did not bring a Jinchuriki into play anywhere, certainly not on foreign soil and certainly not loan said host to another power unless one was dead serious about honoring one's commitments. Kakashi had no doubt now that Wind had switched sides and he'd sent his children to be fed to the meat grinder. He could not recall them because Danzo was penned by Kaze no Kuni's regiments and Suna's unknown benefactors. And he could not send them reinforcements because the hammer would fall on fire hardest and he needed the strength to withstand the first blow. "Thanks, Kosuke," the Hatake told the toad who delivered the message. "You want I should carry something back for Naruto?" Kosuke asked. "Only this. There'll be no reinforcements and that they're on their own. They're neck deep in trouble," the summon replied. "My hands are tied, Kosuke. Tell them that I have every confidence in them." Kosuke nodded and reverse summoned himself. He heaved a sigh and stretched for his letterhead. Time was of the essence now and he needed to get his forces on the alert soonest. But even more important, the fire daimyo needed to know that war was upon them and they were going to face the full brunt of the tempest alone. Ishimatsu Shintami was fast asleep when Kiba came to the tent he shared with 3 others in the barracks. He was a light sleeper, however, and woke up when the door creaked. "The others want to go over some last-minute things with you," Kiba said. Then, thinking about it. "It looks like it's going to be a long meeting and I'd bring my things with me if I were you." Since Shintami had packed stuff for a 2-week-long mission and sealed it away the night before, he simply picked up the scroll, which lay by his bedside and rolled out of bed. Ignoring the groans and mutters the others made at having their rest disturbed, he followed the Inuzuka to the tent that had been assigned the Konoha Shinobi. "What's the deal?" he asked, walking beside the Inuzuka. "We have a lot of marching ahead of us in the days to come and God knows how long we'll be out on the field. Shouldn't we be getting some rest while we still can?" Kiba shrugged. "Hey, I'm just the gopher here, man. But if it's any consolation, you mirrored my sentiments exactly." Shintami nodded, thinking about any need that'd possibly merit summoning him so late in the night before an important mission. It was suspicious enough that a part of him feared his comrades from Konoha had laid a trap. He knew that it was just his paranoia speaking, but still, he slowed down a notch so that Kiba led the way. If the Chunin noticed his actions, he did not say anything and the 2 of them walked in silence until they reached their destination. "What's going on here?" Shintani asked without prelude. He espied Naruto sitting cross-legged in the center of the shelter in the lotus position as if he were a monk. Looking around and taking in the details, he observed that the interior was barren, all furniture apparently having been sealed away in scrolls scattered untidily across the room. Sakura and the others stood crowded together in one corner silently watching the blonde doing whatever it was that he was doing. The only utensil around was a large metal bowl, the kind used to wash one's feet that someone had filled and secured in another corner. This was certainly not what he had expected when he entered the tent. Sakura made a hushing motion and the Danzo loyalist shrugged. He would stay silent, but someone had better answer his questions after Naruto was done with his thing. For the time being, he'd keep his peace and not let his irritation get in the way of teamwork. As they waited for Naruto to come out of his trance, Shintani reflected on the 3 days that had passed since the Konoha Shinobi walked into camp and Danzo appointed him as their liaison. He had no doubt that in spite of the outward show of friendship, the Godame's Nin had gone out of their way to make his life difficult by being uncooperative. What else could account for the fact that even though he knew them to be extremely competent operators from his own observations as well as assorted intelligence reports, none of the 6 shared any information unless he explicitly asked for it. They also did not include him while they were making decisions and always informed him after the fact. And if that wasn't enough of an inconvenience, once they decided to act, they made it a point to keep him in the dark until the very last moment. Like, for instance, right now. Of course, he'd complained to Sakura, who all martial logic to the contrary, seemed to be in charge of the little group, never mind that as per the manual the Aburame should have been in command since he outranked her, but she'd turned a deaf ear to his concerns. A part of him understood that they did not trust Danzo a great deal and were concerned about security. But frankly speaking, he thought it was rather stupid of them to behave the way they did. For even though he spied on them for his master and made daily reports to his leader, he did not mean them any harm. They were all on the same side and would continue to be until that day in the future came when Danzasama's goals were no longer the same as that of the powers that be in Konoha. Presently, Naruto opened his eyes, forcing Shintami to shelve his thoughts for the time being. The blonde's pupils had somehow metamorphosed during his trance, but if the others expected to see the reaction of Danzo's servant, they were bound to be sorely disappointed. He wondered, however, what was up with the creepy eyes and what had the blonde done to himself to make them change so. Yep, found the spot. Naruto, unconcerned by the tense atmosphere, slapped his thigh in satisfaction and announced happily. To Shino, he said, "Bug boy, could you move that basin over here?" The awry moved to obey. "Shin-san, you are after me," Naruto continued after scrunching his weird eyes in thought for a second. Shintami made to ask what, but even as he spoke, the Uzumaki made the necessary blood sacrifice and performed a summoning. A member of the Toad clan materialized out of thin air. "Hey, boss," the little toad summon said as soon as it got its bearings. Then it noticed the state of Naruto's eyes. "You addicted to the energy rush or something, boss?" "Shut up, Kosuke. I'm working here," Naruto replied with a half-hearted glare. Kosuke was sometimes even more annoying than that candy-loving, wise ass of a brat Gamakichi. "Yeah, about that. Kakashi wanted me to pass you a message." Naruto shook his head. He did not want to listen to news from home with their liaison around. The damned snitch would pass it on to Danzo. Sakura's mistake was the last freebie the bastard was going to get from them if the blonde had any say in it. Whatever it is, it can wait until later. I want to toadport everyone in this room somewhere. Kosuke looked around. There were 7 people and an Inuzuka clan mutt for the ride. Very much within his limits. Too many people, he lied, hoping for a bribe. He had his eyes on a cute little lass back home and she had sweet tooth for tuna. "I need help." Making a mental note to make it up to Kosuke later, Naruto summoned a second toad without a word. He knew that the little guy was angling for a sweetener, but the latter loved to dicker before striking a bargain and time was of the essence. Of course, the Uzumaki knew that he could agree to owe a favor and get on with it, but prior experience with Gamakichi on a similar matter made him wary. He'd be damned if he agreed to another deal with a toad in a hurry. The last one had brought him enough embarrassment to last a lifetime. "Now, listen up," he said, pulling out a map and speaking in a voice that was barely loud enough to be heard by everyone present. He pointed to a well some distance from Danzo's camp in the direction of Sunagakure. "We're going here. Kosuke is responsible for Shino, Hinata, Shintani and I. The rest of you follow are with Gamina." It dawned to Shintani then what Naruto had meant by a toadport. The Konoha shinobi obviously meant to give Danzo the slip so that they could operate without ever watchful eyes on their back. The liaison felt that this turn of events simply would not do. But the escape was impossible to prevent as it had already begun. The toad Kosuke had reeled in Naruto with his tongue and swallowed the latter whole. The leaf Nin would resist for certain if he tried to block the getaway, and the consequences to his master's plans would be far-reaching and extremely detrimental if Kakashi's brats were killed inside the camp or their blood spilled. That left Danzo's agent with 2 choices. He could either refuse to leave now and inform his master, or he could accompany them and keep his comrades informed with his own summons. With the former, there was a possibility that the Konoha shinobi would disappear into thin air and handicap the exiled route commander by denying him intelligence on their actions. The latter, however, did not suffer from that disadvantage. And because it was the best of all realistic choices, Shintani stood still when the toad's slimy tongue wrapped around him and dragged him into its gut. Damned he was if he did not hate the loathsome pests with a passion. The few fish swimmingly their lives lazily by scrambled to the edges as 2 toads appeared out of thin air at the bottom of the well. The toads, for their part, ignored the local fauna and lethargically swam to the top. On breaking the water surface, they opened their mouths wide and out popped Naruto from one and a brief second later, Sasuke from another. As he emerged, Naruto's eyes were focused on the sky. He caught sight of a robed stranger staring down at them from the mouth of the well. He waved to the man once his hands were free, but the stranger screamed in terror and ran, leaving his livestock behind. The Uzumaki mentally thanked his luck that it was only a civilian and not some shinobi who'd got the drop on them, and made a note to let the toads do some scouting in the future before insertion. He signaled Sasuke and Ninjato at the ready. They jumped out of the well. A minute later, everyone was out and on flat ground. Naruto, who'd taken charge of the perimeter along with Sasuke, pointed at the fleeing civilian with his hand, drawing everyone's attention to the man. His action offered the perfect opportunity to take care of traitor troubles, and Sakura, who'd been helping the others out and who stood closest to Shintani, seized the moment to stab the man in the back of his neck, neatly severing his spine. As the body went limp and started to collapse, she shifted her leg a little to avoid getting blood on her person. There was no need to stink of blood and death when they were only a minute into the insertion. Naruto shot a smile at the Haruno and gave her a thumbs up. So far, things appeared to be going exceedingly well. Hopefully, the rest of the mission would be just as simple as taking the tiresome spy out. Kiba, take care of that civilian. We don't want witnesses, he said, turning to face the Inuzuka. The Team 8 member nodded and, shooting a single contemptuous look at their erstwhile liaison, took off after his victim with Akamaru. Naruto walked up to the well and kicked the body hard out of spite. Then he spat on the man for good measure. If he had time, he would piss on the bastard as well. Fucking spy, he cursed the corpse and turned to Sasuke. Want to do the rest of the honors? Sasuke nodded and made shooing motions with his hands. His companions moved away from the body, and once he judged the distance safe, he incinerated the body with a gokakyu so hot that it melted the sand to glass. A black plume rose into the sky as the body burned, and the air stank of well-cooked pork. Even as the flames crackled and roared, Hinata ran to the tallest rock within eyesight on her own initiative and did a quick scan of the area with her eyes. If there were unfriendly forces nearby, the smoke would attract them like moths to flame. Meanwhile, Naruto turned to his frog companions as Gamina grabbed a stray locust with her tongue and happily munched on the crispy critter from her perch on his head. So, what did the Hokage say, Kosuke? He asked. He said you're on your own, Kosuke replied, turning away from the blaze. One of the reasons he loved Team 7 so was fire. He was a pyromaniac at heart, and wherever his friends went, an inferno was sure to follow. Hi no Kuni's mobilizing for war, but he can't spare help for you. Naruto shrugged. It was what they'd expected. That's okay. We figured that'd be the case. Thanks, Kosuke. And you too, Gamina. The frogs did the vanishing trick and poofed away. Working his tongue on a cavity, Naruto turned to Kiba, who was walking back to them. Akamaru was at the Inuzuka's side, dragging along their victim by his leg with his powerful jaws. The man's neck was bent at an unnatural angle, leaving no doubt as to his fate. There appeared to be no other marks on the man. You didn't use a weapon? Sakura asked just to be sure. As if I'd do anything that stupid. Akamaru took care of it by himself. I didn't even touch the bastard. He spit in the direction of the fire to show his contempt for the other dead bastard. Like Naruto and Sasuke, when Kiba hated, he hated with all his heart. The converse was also true. Good. Kiba nodded absent-mindedly and went on his knees to check Akamaru's feather shoes. The damned contraption slowed down his friend and made him less effective as a warrior, but it was necessary. Canine tracks as big as Akamaru's were considered as evidence of Konoha involvement across the ninja world. As for the bite marks, there were any number of implements out on the market, sold by Konoha, of course, that perfectly mimicked a dog's provided you could borrow drool from an innocent household pet. For this very reason, some ninja villages bred rabid dogs. Well, that's that, the Inazuka announced, clapping his hands in satisfaction and stretching his back. Yep, Sasuke replied. Naruto grinned predatorily. Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Suna, for here we come. Colonel Seigo Takamori of the 3rd Restoration Brigade rose on his horse and inspected the 4 regiments assembled before him. His whole command of 5,300 soldiers and support personnel was arrayed before him. Ninja were the sole exception, for as the designated scouts, they'd left much earlier. There was the colonel's shinobi guard, of course, but they never put themselves on display. The conscripts stood at rigid attention in excellent formation. The leaf blades of the pikemen shone brightly in the sun and the colors of the brigade fluttered proudly in the air as a grizzled samurai, the color-bearer of the brigade, stood proudly next to the colonel. Judging his troops ready, Takamori twitched a finger at his XO, who in turn signaled the bugler. The bugle sounded march and rank by rank, regiment by regiment, the brigade and its accoutrements commenced their 3-day march to the Kaze no Kuni border. Everything appears to be in order, Takamori commented to his XO, Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke once they were on the road. The lieutenant colonel, another samurai like the colonel himself, nodded. They could stand to be a bit seasoning, he replied. Takamori shrugged. It was a fact of nature that soldiers could always use a little extra experience. Soldiers could always use more training. The pertinent question is, do you think we have trained them enough for the mission? They're steady enough. Having veteran samurai in their ranks to train and lead them has worked very well once we got over the initial hiccups. Funny to hear you speak of broken bones, and dead samurai and civilian recruits as a hiccup. It had to be done. Indeed. Still, I've never liked executing my men. The 3rd Restoration Brigade was one of 7 new formations created 2.5 years back using conscripts from the farmer and merchant classes. This caused much disgruntlement to the samurai class who felt that war was the domain of their caste alone. But the daimyo, who was widely acclaimed to be the strongest rule in Fire's history, had overridden their protests claiming that the recruits would be used primarily as a provincial guard as garrison troops and would not be a part of the regular army. Seigo Takamori had been one of a handful of high-ranking samurai who'd seen the potential in the force and volunteered for it. The government had put forward the remainder of the samurai seed for the new units, including the veteran foot soldiers. The transferees had all been troublemakers that no one wanted. Some were incompetent cretins, others were misfits and still others had list string of disciplinary offenses as long as they were tall for any number of misdemeanors. But they were all proud samurai who felt great dishonor and shame for their apparent fall from grace. Naturally, there had been plenty of friction between the farmer and merchant conscripts and the veteran warriors. It had taken more than a year of harsh training and some very tough decisions, a few involving court-martials and the gallows, to turn the lot into a fighting unit that Takamori privately considered the equal on any samurai unit he'd served with during the many years of his service. Individually, of course, any samurai was the equal of 3 or even 4 of his civilian conscripts, but fighting as a unit with their pikes, their bows, and their newfangled catapult artillery, there was none better. I don't think anyone does. True. We're heading into the furnace now. We should know how useful is this new forged sword and whether the dead souls were a worthy price soon enough. We may get reamed, Shinsuke commented. He was by nature a cynical soul. It's your job and mine to ensure we avoid that. And what happens afterwards? You know what the majority of samurai feel about the new formations. Takamori barked a laugh. Oh, they'll all be too busy fighting for their lives in the short term. You've read the same reports I have. We're facing an alliance of lightning and earth along with a few minor countries. And now, there's also wind that's apparently decided to throw in with our enemies. And after that? The colonel, who understood better than his oldest and most loyal friend what the conscript army meant for his caste, stared straight ahead. In 100 years, his caste would have faded from the face of the earth. But his decision had been made a long time back. His kind and their ilk be damned, his loyalty was to his daimyo and to his country. We all do what we must, Shinsuke replied. If we win, we'll worry about the afterwards. The present has enough troubles, don't you think so? The lieutenant colonel nodded. I would that Hai no Kuni had more time to prepare. Your enemy screws up your plans. That's why he's called the enemy, after all. Well, anyways, Shinsuke said, changing the subject, I hope those assholes in supply come through on their lofty promises. Kawayama Yayachi usually comes through on his promises. And if he doesn't, we'll appropriate comestibles from nearby granaries, Takamori replied serenely. Major Kawayama was the brigade's S4, the logistics officer, and Shinsuke was his best friend. Mind, with war looming around the corner, I'd avoid that if possible in case we end up being besieged. Anyways, we'll see. The midday sun shone mercilessly on her back as she scanned the horizon with eyes that were naturally better than any man-made telescope. The corpses of the observation post's garrison as well as the unfortunate water carriers who'd been on a resupply mission were starting to stink something awful in the afternoon heat, but she ignored the stench just as she tried to ignore the other things being done behind her back. Immediately after the Konoha shinobi overran the post and executed the last of the prisoners, Kiba had argued to throw the bodies out. His nose was too sensitive to the foul odors of rotting carcass and shit combined together, but Team 7 had collectively refused. They had use for the corpses as tools in psychological warfare. After setting Team 8 to watch the approaches, Naruto and Ko spent an hour building crosses from the metal frames of the cots used by the garrison. They used their constructions to crucify the bodies on the slope facing Suna. In case that wasn't enough of a provocation for Suna, they also desecrated the bodies of the Suna Nin by skinning the dead, one of whom had been alive at the start of the procedure until Sakura mercifully cut his throat, disemboweling them or cutting out their eyes, ears and tongue. That wasn't what disturbed Hinata to the core, however. She'd seen and done enough inhumane things to the guerrillas and their supporters in T to have developed a mental shield against such horrors. But seeing Team 7 going about the task while having a whispered conversation full of jokes had nauseated her. Then, suddenly, they were no longer alone. Inbound contact at 2 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Hinata barked, as her eyes picked up two separate patrols on different vectors for their hill. Naruto came and stood beside the Hyuga. She tried to ignore the blood on his hands and his ANBU issue ninjato. Range, ETA, and numbers, he asked, shooting her a look. The Hyuga was a veteran and should have reported those details as well. He had disciplined such failures on the field in the past, but in light of present circumstances, he was willing to excuse her once. For all that their first few months had been baptized by blood, it had taken him and Sakura a very long time before they learnt to shield themselves from the horrors they were forced to perpetrate as part of their trade, after all. And to this day, it got to him sometimes. The one on our 9 o'clock is the closest. Range is approximately 1,500 yards. ETA is 5 minutes in this terrain. There are 12 shinobi in that group. The other one has 10 shinobi. Range is greater than 2,000 yards. They'll probably take 7 or 8 minutes to intercept us. Naruto nodded and turned to Kiba and Shino. Either of you able to sense the enemies? He asked. They shook their heads and Naruto looked thoughtful. Okay, everyone, listen up. This is what we're going to do. We're going to defeat the two response teams in detail. We'll do that by advancing on the group on our 9 o'clock. We'll engage them in that level ground over there. I'll hold their attention. Sasuke and Sakura will hit them on the flank while I keep them distracted. Team 8 will be the reserve and hide themselves in that ravine just to the northwest of the flats. Do not worry about runners. They'll know reinforcements are on their way and will try to pin us down. But we'll hit hard and move fast. In case we're caught between two units, Kiba, Shino and Hinata will fall on their rear and relieve the pressure. Otherwise, I don't want to reveal you three this time. Is that clear? Everyone was. Good, let's show these Suna pussies what it means to mess with fire and leaf. The Suna Nin commander led his reinforced squad on an assault through the Badlands to retake the observation post that had fallen to an unknown force some hours back. He knew that the garrison manning the station was dead. Their last broadcast report before communication ceased had stated that the position was about to be overrun. But if he couldn't rescue them, he damned well was going to exact vengeance in equal measure on their murderers. Afterwards, they would visit the same upon Danzo for daring send his killers so close to Sunagakure. The bastard had managed to elude justice for so long only because of lack of evidence, but after this day, the Suna Nin commander would ensure that it would no longer be the case. Even if he had to cook up the proof himself. Spotting a masked Naruto holding a blade and blocking the trail about 200 yards in their line of advance, the commander slowed down and signaled 2 teams of 2 to take the man on his flank. The blonde moved before the Suna teams could even begin to obey their leader and launch an attack, however. One moment, the blade-wielding Uzumaki was standing far away and the next, he was in the commander's face, throwing a powerful spin kick to his head. The Suna Nin raised his arm barely in time to block the blow for all the good it did him. The kick easily broke the bones in his hands and still had enough force behind it that when it slammed into his target's head it instantly crushed his skull. The resultant vector shot him across the hard, rock-studded ground, where he pinwheeled and crashed into a boulder some distance away with a sickening thud. The only saving grace was that Naruto's victim was dead long before he hit the ground. The surviving Suna Nin stared at Naruto goggle-eyed at the quick victory. Their commander had been a decorated and highly experienced jounin, and yet, the blonde assassin had crushed him as if he was really a genin. Enjoying the trepidation his enemies felt, Naruto slid into an easy stance with his ninjato held away from his body, mocking them. To add insult to Suna's injured pride, he made no move to retreat when the survivors advanced on him. "I'm here to kill you, Suna pussies," he said with a snicker. "Motherfucker," one of the Suna Nin cursed hoarsely and charged, his weapons at the ready. The man's squad mates rallied around his defiant cry and followed his lead. However, the counterattack ended less than a second later when Naruto disappeared once again. He reappeared at the wannabe Avenger's position to strike the man and the Suna Nin flew back from the strength of the blow. The victim hit the ground haphazardly some distance away and skidded to a halt. Luckily, he escaped the visually spectacular crash with only a few scrapes, but not even a single laceration, much less a broken bone. Unfortunately, the ninjato sticking out on both sides of his chest where Naruto had stabbed him through the heart had been instantly fatal. Still, even as Naruto struck the fatal blow, the man's teammates attacked en masse, aiming to bring him down with sheer weight of numbers. But if the survivors thought that the blonde was vulnerable after striking such a powerful blow, they were sorely disappointed. As the first of the lot reached him, he moved into his assailant's guard, shoved him into the next one and jumped clear of the trap. The Nin that Naruto shoved crashed into his neighbor and together they went down, one screaming in pain as the other's kunai embedded deep in his arm. But even as they fell, another Suna Nin quickly ran through the requisite seals and shot a chakra flare into the sky signaling for help. The man realized that he and the others may have bitten off more than they could chew and would need all the help they could get to bring down the killer in their midst. In parallel with his actions, the remaining shinobi unleashed elemental attacks at their assailant. Impromptu blades of wind and streams of fire and water hit the masked ninja. Wind and flame combined to turn the flames into a superhot inferno and water evaporated into superheated steam at the temperatures involved. A shroud of steam fast enveloped the area, obscuring sight, and scalding and sterilizing everything in its way. The Suna Nin scrambled aside, both to avoid the expanding cloud of steam and to prevent their enemy from getting the drop on them if he'd survived. If they could not pinpoint his position and he could localize theirs through some means, then they would be at even more of a disadvantage. And with someone as powerful as their belligerent, that was the last thing they needed if they wanted to survive. Seconds passed in silence as everyone waited with their guards up for the steam to clear. Since any potentially sound could give them away, the wounded shinobi, a chunin, quietly bit into a spare kunai, and slapping a field bandage over his wound, downed a shot of field anesthetic. The powerful narcotic would prevent him from participating directly in the battle, but it would not so impair him that he could not provide his teammates with support from afar with the 2 ranged attacks he had in his arsenal. But for some reason, the steam did not clear. In fact, it seemed to grow thicker still as the seconds passed. "Genjutsu," someone shouted in warning, finally putting 2 and 2 together and realizing what must have happened. On hearing those dreaded words, the surviving sand ninja scrambled desperately in a race against time to break the illusion. The illusionary steam cleared as their chakra coils reasserted themselves and the survivors saw that even their quick reaction hadn't been fast enough. They were now 2 less in number, and the wounded chunin and another were dead. In fact, even as they gained situation awareness, a third individual, another chunin, fell as a Sakura materialized behind him and repeatedly stabbed him in the back, puncturing both his kidneys in the process. Her victim went down on his knees with his mouth gaping wide open in a silent rictus of excruciating agony and died of exsanguination. His neighbor shot a quick gokakyu at the assassin medic. He charged with his kunai, aiming to get in close and take her down, but she twisted out of his attack. As he stepped past her, she tapped him on the back of his head with glowing hands and he fell like a puppet that had its strings cut. 6 down. Seeing their numbers reduced to half the original strength, one of the survivors spared a glance at his compatriots. The ease with which his teammates had fallen convinced him that discretion was the better part of valor and he turned to make a run for it. He did not make it 5 yards, however, before Sasuke kawarimed into his path and stuck a punch dagger in his groin. The man went down hard, wailing loudly. Naruto re-entered the fray then, having taken a break for heaven knew what once Sakura joined battle. His prey neatly stepped out of his initial blow with an impressive jump to put as much distance between the 2 of them as possible. Unfortunately for him, the Uzumaki simply kawarimed the man in the middle of the fight and sent him on a crashing course with his pink-haired teammate. The Haruno, for her part, brushed the Sunanin with her deadly hands before he could realize what was happening and he collapsed on the dirt, internally, bleeding to death from a severed aorta. Concurrently, the remaining 4 survivors of the original Suna force found themselves in dire straits. 3 were dragged into the ground courtesy of traps dug by Kage Bunshin and buried up to their necks in the hot sands. The 4th was set upon by Sasuke and went down under a flurry of blows with a fine spray of blood to decorate his passage into the next world as the Uchiha made short work of him with his ninjato. In all, less than a minute had passed since the Suna team realized they were under a genjutsu. That was anticlimactic after the anticipation of the last new days. I'll grant that steam attack was awesome, however, the Naruto observed, pulling out his ninjato from his victim's chest with a heave. The blade was nicked from when the moron had rolled on the fucking ground. The blonde just knew that such idiots who could not even die gracefully ended up in a nasty corner of hell. I mean, the bastards did not even put up a fight. We were more powerful than the lot and we had surprise on our side. What else did you expect? Sasuke replied thoughtfully. Then, whatever fancy struck him, he decided to go on an ego trip. But seriously, who cares how a bunch of sonnefucks die? The only thing that matters here is that I was awesome. Shut up, Yuke, Sakura replied heatedly, hefting a rock and approaching the 3 trapped nin. She'd killed 5 and was about to execute 3 more while the 2 wimps had only managed 4 between them. They had no right to talk the way they did. Why didn't you enter the genjutsu earlier? Sasuke, not understanding the thin ground he stood on, sneered. And miss a grand entrance? If Naruto gets to make one, so do I. Sasuke, the Haruno ground angrily, should I kick your ass for being an idiot on the battlefield? She punctuated her words by bringing the rock down on the heads of the 3 trapeze one after another, caving their skulls in. With 10 more inbound, Team 7 couldn't afford to leave the 3 alive. Not that she could let them live after learning the names of her teammates. Then there was also the Godame's standing order to execute Sunanin. Never mind with the nitpicking, the bastards are dead. Nope. Sasuke replied cheerily. Bastard. Naruto chuckled at the byplay and clapped his hands together to draw his teammates' attention. Sasuke and Sakura turned to him and he pointed them in the right direction with his hand. I was starting to wonder where the rest had gone, he said. On me, my trusty sidekicks. Fuck you, Naruto. Sasuke replied with a snort. Nevertheless, he took position at the blonde's side. In your dreams, the Uzumaki replied, running through the seals and filling his lungs with air. The Uchiha shook his head at that cliched retort and flicked his blade to get rid of the blood some. He would have to clean it better after the coming engagement, but for now, the little shake would have to do. By this time, the Sunanin were only 50 yards away now and starting their final rush. They were split into 5 teams with reasonable separation between them. They looked to be reasonably well led. Unlike the first squad and Wonder of Wonders, there was even a genjutsu user amongst them. Naruto shrugged off the illusion as it laid hold on him. He may not be able to do illusionary techniques worth a damn, but he was very experienced at dispelling them. He had 2 extremely talented users for teammates and they'd been encouraged by all his teachers to use him as a guinea pig, after all, and breathed out the powerful strength Katan Zukoku targeting the 2 teams on the left. The Genjutsu adept was on that flank and the Uzumaki aimed to burn the bastard to cinder. The charging Sunanin did not stand a chance against the furious, hot flames and were immolated at such close quarters. Everything in the direction of the conflagration for hundreds of yards went up in smoke. Even as Naruto spewed fire, Sasuke and Sakura countercharged the remaining 3 teams. The Uchiha went in first with a lightning-fast, but extravagant cut with his ninjato. His target weaved out of the way, which accomplished Sasuke's goal of splitting him and his teammate. Sakura rushed in to seize the opportunity, but before she could even land a blow, she was forced to jump back to avoid a lightning technique that a kunoichi from a second team threw at her. Right at the very moment, Naruto flew in fast with his ninjato. His eyes were set on the kunoichi who thwarted Sakura as his next target, but her teammate raised an earthen wall to protect her. The Uzumaki jumped back and joined his teammates. The Sunanin confidently advanced. Sakura threw a genjutsu and Naruto threw a weak daitapa at the ground. As their enemies fought to suppress the illusion and overcome the improvised dust screen, the blonde jumped high into the air. Simultaneously, Sasuke charged straight ahead and Sakura sank into the ground. 2 of the Sunanin acting in tandem retaliated by throwing a wall of shuriken into the air that was sped along its merry way by a powerful daitapa. Naruto was hit multiple times in midair and hit the ground hard, crumbling into dirt as he did. The real Uzumaki shot a powerful blast of fire from his assailant's rear and one raised an earthen wall to defend his teammate and himself. The other slammed his hand into the ground and summoned a weasel. As the roar of flames died down, the weasel unleashed a powerful wind strike. Wind attacks were a specialty of the weasel clan, that cut through the wall as knife through butter and battered the area where Naruto stood. The Uzumaki Kawarimed himself out of harm's way and slamming his hand on the ground, performed a Yomi Numa. His opponents jumped clear of the mud swamp that formed under their feet, but the act separated them and an earth clone body checked the wind user hard as he neared the end of his flight. The man stabbed the clone even as it slammed into him, but the clone's purpose was accomplished. With 1 ribs broken and 2 more bruised from the hit, the Sunanin no longer had the mobility he had at the start of the fight. The wind user's partner, seeing the other's predicament, rushed Naruto to buy his partner time to regain his feet, but the latter had him outclassed in everything that mattered. Easily overpowering the weasel with a quick shunshin, the blonde stabbed it with his blade. Then, as he ran sideways to avoid the hail of shuriken the earth user threw at him, he caught an errant projectile between the fingers of his free hand and advanced on his opponent. Naruto's ninjato came up to eviscerate his enemy even as he flung back the throwing star as a distraction, but the man was a smart one and Kawarimed out of danger. Still, the Uzumaki got a piece of the middle finger of his left hand and the pain from the wound would only increase the time it took the Sunanin to execute techniques. The blonde smiled grimly at his little victory and rocketed forward, seeking to press home his advantage for a quick victory. But his opponent had time enough to bring up a kunai and point it so that Naruto ran straight into the razor-sharp blade even as he himself leaned under the Konoha nin's blade. The Uzumaki opened his mouth to scream in pain and his henge vanished into thin air. Another copy came from the side slashing and cut up the replacement left behind by the Sunanin in two. Naruto barely had a moment then to realize that he'd walked into a trap when blades of wind slammed into his back and shredded him into little slivers. The dirt from the mud clone and fell to the earth to form a little puddle. Realizing the peril he was in, the wind user preemptively twisted out of the way but he acted too late. The Uzumaki's ninjato cut bone and flesh as it penetrated into his chest cavity and he threw up his head, screaming and writhing in agony. The blonde nodded in satisfaction. That strike had pierced the right lung and as evidence, his victim collapsed on the ground, bright arterial blood flowing out of his mouth. Well, maybe, that cut got more than a piece of the lung. You bastard, the dying man's partner screamed hoarsely and charged. In return, Naruto jumped over his victim and countercharged his assailant. They met midway in the air and furiously exchanged blows. The Uzumaki attacked with his blade and the enemy fought with his kunai, but there really was no hope for the latter. The blonde's skill with the blade was mediocre at best, but he outclassed the other so much in speed and agility with the added advantage of greater reach from his weapon that the outcome of the fight was a foregone conclusion. Thus, when his opponent made one misguided thrust with his kunai aiming to sever the blonde's jugular, Naruto grabbed hold of the offending appendage in a vice grip with his free hand. Then, holding the Sunanin firmly in place by twisting his arm, the Uzumaki chopped it off with the ninjato held in his other hand. This proved to be a big mistake as arterial blood fountained all over the blonde's face and rendered him temporarily blind. Sensing the danger he was in, Naruto jumped backwards to gain some breathing space. He landed badly even though the jump did not carry him all that far and he fell down. Nevertheless, he released his enemy's severed hand and wiped at his face furiously, ignoring the stinging pain from the cut he'd received when his ninjato bit into his flesh during the fall. He knew his only hope for survival was to regain his vision as fast as possible. A blind man had no place facing even a cripple in a battlefield, after all. Not unless he had suicide wish, whereupon it would be granted post-haste. As Naruto worked on his eyes, the Sunanin fumbled another kunai from his holster and staggered drunkenly towards his prey. He was mere feet away and fast losing consciousness from blood loss when Naruto regained his eyesight. For whatever reason, perhaps because he knew he was moments away from death by blood loss and wanted to go out in as flamboyant a manner as possible, or because he was a patriot who worked to rid his nation of its enemies even at deathbed, the shinobi jumped into the air, aiming to use the force of his crash to stab the blonde fatally in his chest. His dreams were not to be, however, as a kunai took him in his head with a resounding thwack at the apex of his flight. Naruto rolled safely out of the way as the man's lifeless body crashed into the ground and lay twitching. The Uzumaki knew what that kunai meant and laid on his back over the blistering hot ground, thanking whatever god had favored him in today's battle. He remained thus until Sasuke and Sakura walked into his view. The Uchiha dutifully extended a hand and the blonde grabbed hold of it and pulled himself up. Once he'd regained his feet, he looked around and confirmed what he knew, that they were only ones left standing in the field. Thanks, Sasuke, Sakura, he said quietly with a rueful smile on his face. Could have happened to anyone, the Uchiha replied. Hell, it had even happened to him once. Naruto chuckled and doggedly walked over to inspect their downed enemies. He used a Kage Bunshin armed with a kunai to slit their throats one by one. They were all dead except for one caught in his fire attack, but the blonde liked to be thorough. The lone survivor was horribly burned and barely alive. There wasn't a patch of skin on him that wasn't burnt to a crisp, and he kept up a low-frequency keen at his own unimaginable pain. "Oh, shut up," the Uzumaki muttered as he lifted his leg and stomped on the poor bastard's throat, putting the man out of his misery. His motivation in granting even this small mercy was twofold. 1. It was the right thing to do, and 2. To maximize the psychological effect of this massacre on Suna's ruling establishment, they could leave no survivors behind. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.